John, Paul, George, and Ringo go to Paris.
Wow, I thought they were hot.
It's rare and unseen. The Beatles.
The owner of the Olympia, Bruno Cocatrix, was a very known figure in show business, and he wanted to put up a hot show with the hottest artists from France, from the States, and from England. So he took Trini Lopez from America, who had a huge hit at the time worldwide, If I Had a Hammer. And me, I was at the beginning of my career and had many, many hits. And I was the only girl singing rock and roll in those days. And the Beatles, of course, who were the sensation already in England, but not in France so far. And so they were kind of a sensation, and people discovered them at this concert in France. And that was prior their tour in America.
I was the drummer with Trini Lopez, and one of our venues that we were going to do was the Olympia Theater in Paris, and they said, you're going to share the bill with this little unknown group we'd never heard of in America called the Beatles. And then we had this terrific gal, Sylvie Vartan. She was on the bill with us. And I got to tell you, the Beatles, I'd never heard of them, you know, because I was from the States. They had not been to the States yet. And they were young kids, as we were young kids, and we just sort of hit it off and sort of became buddies. We were together day and night, practically. We hung out in the daytime together. Obviously, we played at night. We partied at night. And we just sort of became a family.
Well, I remember the show as a very hot ticket. And so the Beatles came, and they were like a wave that came over Paris.
Opening night, I watched their concert from the side of the stage, and I thought they were pretty good, you know. They were young kids. The music was pretty simple. 3-chord rock and roll, love me, I love you, simple stuff.
I loved it. I thought they looked so original, and with their haircut. But they were kind of looked outrageous for the time.
We just had so much great fun together working the Olympia, and the way the footage came about, I always took a little bit of home movie footage of where we were, what we were doing. So I had a friend of mine go up in the balcony and shoot a bunch of footage of Trini Lopez, Dave Shriver, and myself during our part of the show. I went up in the balcony and shot a piece of Sylvie Vartan's part of the show. And then I decided I wanted to shoot the Beatles too, because nobody had ever heard of them. I didn't know if we ever would in the States, even though they did go on to be some of the greatest geniuses of music, I think. So I went up in the balcony on stage right, shot this footage of the Beatles, and I just was so in love with those guys. Not so much as musicians or as a group. I was in love with the guys. They were just the best guys. So I came down on the balcony, I ran over to the side of the stage, and I shot more footage at the side of the stage. And so this few minutes of footage I have at the Beatles on stage at the Olympia Theater, I think is the only footage of them on stage at the Olympia.
The Olympia was packed, and screaming audiences, and you know, it was the era was like that. It was volcanic and loud, and everything was new for everyone, for the kids, for us, for the music.
John was a fun-loving guy, and we laughed. He had a sense of humor that was a little bit warped, and I think that's from being a musician. Musicians' humor is a little bit warped. But John was one of those guys, man, he was hysterical. He was really a funny guy.
And I remember John was the one that appeared to me the wittiest, and he was always joking and, you know, posing, and very friendly, and he was the one who was the most outgoing, from far as I remember.
Every time we would drive by the Olympia Theater, I'd go, oh, And I'd get my camera and shoot the marquee. And then I stopped one day and I walked across the street and shot the whole front of the theater with La Olympia and the Beatles, Trini Lopez and Sylvie Vartan.
It was just like a Broadway theater, 2,400 people. But I mean, the chairs were broken and all that, you know. It was just a very hot audience and ambiance, you know, in the backstage as on stage.
George is the one guy that I really didn't feel like I ever really got to know personally. He was a cordial guy. He was in a good mood. I never saw him out of sorts with anybody. He was always seemed to be in a good mood, but he was a little bit shy, and he was pretty quiet.
George, he was kind of more, you know, shy or something, or I wouldn't say shy, but he seemed like he was a little, you know, aside from the others.
I got to ride in Paul's, Austin, Mini Cooper all around London, 80 miles an hour, fearing for my life. But the coolest guy, man, just the nicest, real, average, down-home kind of person to me.
Paul was, he looked very proper to me. He was always very polite and quieter.
Ringo and I got along great. Ringo, we were drummers, so we really had something in common, and we would talk about this lick or that lick or playing here or our setup.
Ringo was also outgoing. You know, he was the drummer, and he was always his drumsticks, you know, up in the air. He was cracking jokes as well, and no, it was a very lively and young atmosphere, really genuine. And at that time they were like you know, very outrageous, and everybody was saying, oh my god, their long hair, it's incredible, it's terrible, you know. They looked like rebels.
The show was great. When you saw the Beatles in a venue such as Shea Stadium, it was not the greatest experience in the world because you really couldn't hear what they were doing. But at the Olympia Theater, all of those shows were great because of great sound and an intimacy. At the front of the stage, you were 6 feet from the front row.
Wow, I thought they were hot.
When we were closing at the Olympia, the last night, we all went to dinner after the show, and they said, well, day after tomorrow, we're leaving for New York to do a television show. I said, oh, really? That's great. You're going to America. Yeah, we're really excited. I said, well, do you know what show you're doing? He said, yeah, we're doing a show called The Ed Sullivan Show. I said, you're going to love that because it's probably the #1 best variety show in America at the time. John looked over at me and he said, yeah, but, you know, we want to do something where we can be seen in California. I said, well, you'll be seen in California. He said, we'll be seen in California? I said, correct. It's a network show. It'll be seen all over the country. And he had a little problem with that because the country of England is the size of our state of New Jersey, you know, or New York. And so it was hard for him to understand that they'd do a show in New York and be seen in California. So they were pretty pumped up about that.
Coming up after our break, their break on Rare and Unseen, the Beatles.